All right, we're live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Getting Personal with Compt. If this is your first time, I'm so glad you're joining us. If you're coming back, I'm still glad you're joining us. This is a show that is all about exploring the ways that we can make the employee experience a more human experience. It's something we talk about all the time internally. We talk about it in the interviews that we do. We talk about it in this show. So I'm so glad that I am joined today by Dani Herrera. Dani is a DEI consultant, trainer, and speaker, and she posts some content that I think most people would really resonate with on LinkedIn. That is how I came across Dani. Dani, welcome. Can you tell everyone a little
Thank
bit more about you?
you. Hi, Lauren. Thank you so much. I'm very, very excited to be here. So, yes, I'm Dani Herrera. As you mentioned, I am now a DE&I consultant, trainer, and speaker, but I actually have 17 years of experience, maybe a little bit more. I don't really want to do the math anymore. But I do, I do have like over 15 years of experience in recruitment, talent operations, and leadership as well. I was a recruiter, like hands-on recruiter for a very, very long time. I was born and raised in Buenos Aires, Argentina, South America. I moved to New York about like 7 years ago. And I worked in multiple different industries and countries and many, many different things. But about 7 years ago, I started to focus a little bit more in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Like the story is way longer. We are not going to go there. But about again 7 years ago, I started to focus a little bit more in diversity, equity, and inclusion in the way that I kind of connected with the talent experience and the recruitment experience and the interview experience as well. And that's been my focus ever since then. So that's what I do.
So, because you have seen the way that DEI has transformed within organizations over the course of your career, and I mean, let's be real, so much has changed in just the last 3 years.
Yeah.
So that's like a blip on on the radar of what DEI has looked like over the course of this trajectory. But I want to ask you, in your expertise, why is inclusive hiring so essential for organizations? Like, how
Right.
can that positively impact not just the organization, but candidates?
100%. So before we get to that question, I would love to make like to get into the details of like what inclusive hiring is, right? Because a lot of people
Yes.
think about inclusive hiring that they think about diversity recruiting, right? And those are like two different things. So diversity recruiting, for those who are watching or listening, is basically just hiring based on representation, right? Like
Mm,
looking for diverse talent between a million air quotes. And then inclusive hiring or equitable hiring is making sure that the entire process, the entire system, the entire organization is again inclusive, equitable, and accessible, that the process itself is welcoming, inclusive, that the process that we are following is again inclusive, that the system that we are following, the questions that we are asking, that the hiring managers are trained, that the interviewers are trained. So, with that, a little bit of information, the reason why it is important is, of course, it kind of feeds into the both the candidate experience, the talent experience, the retention process, and of course the talent attraction experience as well. And the reason behind it is some companies focus a little bit too much on diversity recruiting, which is great, right? We of course want to increase representation. We want to make sure that we have diverse organizations, right? But what happens when you are actually interviewing that diverse talent between a million air quotes? Like, are you interviewing them inclusively?
mm-hmm.
Is your process equitable? Are you providing reasonable accommodations for someone that has a disability? Are you making sure that if you are reaching out to talent that you were not reaching out to in the past, like maybe 4 years ago? Are you making sure that you are not asking the same questions that you're asking, like that you were asking like 4 years ago? Have you
Mm,
adapted your processes to make sure that your candidates are not going to um, follow down through the funnel, right? So
mhm.
that is the reason why. So the end game here is to make sure that we are actually able to hire the talent that we want to hire, right?
Right. So, because this is such a crucial step in making for a better employee experience, I mean, because I guess it's candidate experience outwardly and then internally employee experience, but
Right.
you would hope that those people become employees because you've created a good system, you've created a good experience for them. How do we do that? I know that's a really loaded question,
It is a very
but are
loaded.
there like strategies, best practices? Like, what have you seen work really well?
Sure. So of course, every single company is different. Every single company is a completely different stage. So my initial recommendation is always to, and I know that this is extremely hard to do, but to pause and actually review the processes that you have in place, because inequities and biases and prejudices, they actually have the tendency to, to hide in plain sight, right? Like, because we've been following the same processes and policies for decades without like any updates. Like, we
Right.
haven't been asking ourselves why we ask a certain question, right? Like, we just do it because that's the same way that we've been doing it for decades, right? So the first step here is to pause and review whatever it is that we have in place, to identify any biases that we might be able to minimize. Again, we might not be able to remove them completely, but we can minimize them, right? And that, again, that can mean something completely different for many different companies, right? For some companies might mean maybe to pause the referral program because they might realize that two different things might be happening. They might realize that they're actually offering an inequitable experience,
Mhm.
because as you might know, some companies, what they do is they offer like a different experience for a referral, right? Like they
Right.
know that all referrals may receive an answer within the first 48 hours of applying to a particular role, and that is not the same treatment that a regular candidate receives. So
Mm,
that on its own is inequitable, right? And then on top of it, if the company itself is already facing issues with diversity or representation, we are already adding more issues into it, because of course the referrals that you are going to receive probably are not going to be as diverse as you would expect them to be. So that's one thing. Something else that companies might want to review is maybe you want to I don't know, replace your recruitment phone screens
mm,
for video interviews, and making sure that all of your video interviews, like one-on-one video interviews, not pre-recorded video interviews, that they have subtitles on them, that you are offering both the interviewee and the interviewer the opportunity to have a virtual background or a neutral background behind them to minimize affinity bias during the interview, making sure that we are sending a specific agenda for the
mhm.
conversation, if we can, maybe sending the specific questions for the conversation again. So there is not one thing that we can do. There is no one size fits all type of solution. What we need to do again is pause, review every single step of the entire process, identify all of those biases, and see where we can embed inclusion in all of those steps.
This is so interesting to me and really further solidifies the importance of DEI experts within companies, or at least as a consultant, because something you said struck me that I didn't even think about before, the affinity bias of my background. Like,
Right,
yeah, I just
right,
happen to have a plain white wall behind me because I haven't
exactly.
felt like painting. But that is something that could either work for or against me in an
100%.
interview.
100%. And imagine, for example, like the example that I always give, and I think that we can even go back, like pre-pandemic. There was like this example. It was like a TV interview with this person, and he had like his kid running behind him,
Mm-hmm.
and like it was like very like viral and everything. So that could
Right.
happen during an interview as well. Or maybe you can see, like, I don't know, like someone has some artwork and you might or might not like that artwork. Or maybe you can see a guitar, and maybe, I don't know, like in your teens, you play the guitar, and maybe for whatever reason you didn't do well, and you had like very strong feelings one way or another for that instrument, right? So all of those things will come into play during the interview, right? Again, it's not a perfect solution, but until we pair those things with training, with awareness, with all of a lot of other solutions throughout the interview process, that is something else that we can do to, solidify all of the other things we are doing.
That's so interesting to me. I want to hear, because you're giving some very specific examples, but I
Yeah.
want to hear more about maybe an example or situation in which you helped a company be more inclusive, and take me through what that looked like. What were they doing wrong? How did they
Oh
change,
yeah.
and what does that success look like for them in the end because of working with you?
Yeah, so something that I remember seeing actually with a company that I worked very, very recently, and again, this was a very, very specific example because, again, fixing the entire system takes time. Again, it's not something that we
Right.
can go in and fix like in a week, right? Like it's gonna take time because, again, recruiting has been unintentional and uninclusive by design for way too long, right? So it's going to take time
Mhm.
to fix the entire thing. So something that we worked on with a global company just a couple of weeks ago was on the inclusive communications that they were using when they were communicating with candidates. So what we did was an overhaul from the job descriptions that they were using to the way that they were communicating with candidates, both in writing, to the phone screens or the video interviews that they were doing, to actually the offer letters. And we took it a step further and we also reviewed some of the communications that they were using in the performance review cycle. Because something that we know is women and Black women and women of color in particular, both during the interview process and the performance review cycle, they tend to review, specifically in the feedback process, like in the interview feedback and the performance review cycle,
Mhm.
they tend to receive feedback that is based on feelings and perceptions and their attitude instead of their skills. So something
Mhm.
that we worked on very, very closely was on making sure that everybody that was involved in the interview process was very aware of the language that they were using, again, when communicating with candidates and when writing feedback and when writing their performance reviews. So again, the entire process could be a little bit more inclusive and equitable at the end of the day.
That's interesting. Do they
Yeah,
have some like short-term success from that you've
they
heard
did.
of?
They did. So, of course, I can't share a lot of
Right.
the information because it's privileged
Mhm.
data and private information. But basically, they had very, very specific goals. And for what I've learned, and again, this was about like 2 months ago.
Mhm.
So the numbers that we received, and again, only 2 months after the numbers were very positive, we are waiting to hear from like 4 months in the
Right.
future because we want to see like 6 months and a year from them. But hopefully we'll continue to grow. But yeah,
So this is also a process that takes time. It's not
no,
something
a
that's going to
hundred
happen
percent.
overnight. You're not going to see the change in an organization with just a few changes in job description wording.
Yeah, and of course, like job descriptions, actually, you can see the change a little bit faster
Hmm.
because you can actually see the number of applications that you are receiving. And that's something that you can see a little bit faster, not only in the number of applications that you're receiving, but also the candidate demographics that you are attracting. And again, you already have, and again, this might not be the perfect solution for every single company because you already have to have a system in place to be able to track those demographics, or you might need to have like an ATS system. If that's not the
Right.
case for you, I might recommend maybe a different solution. But again, it really depends on where you are at that particular moment. But if you already have those systems in place, starting with an inclusive job description, it is something that you can actually see quite quickly. You will
Mhm.
see more applications, you will see the demographics that you are attracting, and then you can actually follow through those numbers through the interview funnel. And you can actually pinpoint what's happening with those candidates. Like, are they moving through the interview process? Are they
Oh yeah.
following down through the interview process? Where are they like following through? Is there an issue with a particular hiring manager, for instance? Do we need to tackle a particular discipline? Do we need to tackle a particular hiring manager? So there's a lot of information and there's a lot of data that we can also look into just by looking into what came from an inclusive job description.
That's so interesting. So I
Yeah,
want to ask you a little bit bigger picture, and there's
yeah,
two parts to this question. So as organizations, I mean, not just embrace inclusive hiring, but invest in that as well. What other challenges might they face? And then are there resources, support systems? What can they do? What can they leverage to overcome those challenges
yeah.
effectively? Because we all want
So
to do the right thing, I would think.
one would think. So I would say, as it happens with many other things and anything that has to do with talent and talent operations and HR and all of those lovely things, the main challenge sometimes is actually getting, like business leads buy-in, especially now when I'm pretty sure that you and the audience probably have seen it. Back in 2020 and 2021, diversity and inclusion was top of mind for pretty much everyone. Like everyone was deeply, deeply invested. And then come 2023, we are seeing those investments dwindling, right? Like we are
Mhm.
seeing a lot of companies like letting their diversity and inclusion teams go. Those budgets are being cut, their teams are being cut. So I would say that that's probably today the main challenge that we are seeing. There is a million different reasons for why that's happening, but if we need to think about like the main challenge that we are seeing today, that is probably it. And then how to overcome those challenges? That is actually a loaded question because, again, it really depends on where the company is and whether they're still as committed as they were back in 2020
Right.
to diversity and inclusion. But one of the things that I usually suggest is, like progress over perfection. We were talking about this before, like we didn't get to the situation that we are in right now with inequality, inequity, and all of those things like from one day to the next. This is centuries in the making, right? And it's gonna take some time to fix it, like to fix like the entire thing. However, we can fix smaller things step by step and little by little. So, those are the things that I usually suggest focusing on, like not losing sight of the big picture, because of course, we do want to achieve like the bigger picture and make sure that we are achieving like the most inclusive and equitable workplace as we can. But even if we don't the same budget as we had last year, even if we don't have the same team as we had last year, we can still do this project, or we can still work on this particular thing. Maybe we can still tackle inclusive job descriptions, or we can still tackle, I don't know, reviewing the questions that we are asking our candidates. We can still review our reasonable accommodations processes. We can still look for organizations that we want to partner with next year or next quarter or whatever that is. So I think that the key here is to never stop, because once we do, it's just easy to let go.
I'm so glad you touched on the budget part of it, because
Yeah.
we are seeing it from our end as well as an HR tech
Yeah.
company. People are consolidating tools. They keep moving back and forth between reducing headcount, reducing spend elsewhere, and reducing headcount, reducing spend elsewhere. And I think it is so difficult for HR teams and the people who are tasked with making a better employee experience to make those hard choices, because I think
Yeah.
so many of us realize the importance of a commitment to DEI and how that trickles down to retention.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
that saves us money in the end instead of having to constantly hire more people. But when you see just the high level budget item, so many are quick to just slash what they can. But I like your suggestions of things that, I mean, like rewriting a job description to be more inclusive.
Exactly. And then at the end, it is kind of free, right? Like we can do it for
Yeah.
free. We can also do it with like more
Correct.
expensive tools and platforms, right? But at the end of the day, like hopefully, and going back to the very beginning of our conversation, like the goal here is to actually embed inclusion and equity in every single thing that we do. So hopefully in a couple of years from now, like even if we are talking about like a tech platform or a tech tool or something that has absolutely nothing to do with talent or recruitment or whatever it is, that platform or that system or that process or policy would already have inclusion and equity and accessibility embedded into it as well.
Dani, thank you so much for your time.
Of course.
I love that you just naturally circled the conversation back to the beginning. I have found so many people that I interview are just fantastic at weaving all of these things together. It makes for a great conversation. It's exciting to me because I learn new things with every person I speak with. And I feel like we're going to just keep uncovering ways that we can improve the employee experience. And I'm important to me as an employee because it's also helping me understand what I should stand for and what I shouldn't in this future of work, which is really the now of work.
Exactly. 100%. 100%.
So where can people reach out to you, contact you if they're looking for some consultancy, some help?
Yeah. So like the easiest way to find me is on LinkedIn, which is Daniela G. Herrera, and I'm sure that we can send it over. Or if not, like all of my links are on a link tree, which is DEI by Dani. Like you go in there and you'll find like everything, my LinkedIn, my blog, my website, newsletter, like all of those lovely things.
Fabulous. I mean, regardless, I recommend following you on LinkedIn. Really enjoy the posts. And before we go, congratulations again on your visa.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it was a very, very long journey. Very, very long journey.
Yes, I can imagine. Well, you know, much like DEI, you're familiar with long journeys.
Yes, very, very familiar. Very familiar with long and ongoing journeys.
Thank you again for your time, Dani. Thanks everyone for watching, for tuning in. If you have any questions for us, drop them in the comment section wherever you're watching this throughout the day or over the course of the next few weeks. This video lives forever, so I hope you'll be able to get something from it. And if you would like to be a guest on Getting Personal with Compt, or if you just want to chit chat with me anyway, we don't have to record. Reach out. You can reach me at lauren@io. Thanks so much, everyone. Bye.
Bye.